Today on With the First Pick, the Reese's Senior Bowl watch list is out, and who better to have on the show to talk about it than Senior Bowl Executive Director Jim Nagy. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's Rick Spielman. This is episode 175. And Jim, thank you so much for taking time to join us. I know you're incredibly busy. And Rick, Jim is so happy to be here that he wore a jacket.
Yeah, no, it's like, this is, we've got Debo from the Ivory Tower coming down to produce this today. Jim in his jacket. I mean, you asked me, do I ever get nervous about going on a podcast and doing a podcast? This one, I was actually up at 3 a.m. just nervous about getting on here to do this show. But I do let our listeners know this is going to be a very special show. And a lot of people don't know what goes on behind the scenes and how important the Senior Bowl is as far as the scouting process goes with the scouts and with all the organizations. And so hopefully this will be very informative on actually what the Senior Bowl is and why it's so important.
Yeah, Jim, thank you. Thank you for joining us. We're glad to have you here. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys. And as Rick knows, I mean, us football guys, we don't love wearing jackets and suits. I actually have a little speaking thing this afternoon. That's why I have this on. So, no, I'm really fired up to be on with you guys.
Hey, let me ask you this, Jim, because my experience with Rick on a personal level, we've been doing this podcast almost 2 years, Rick, which is crazy. But also when we're on the road at pro days and Senior Bowls, he's something of a ball buster. Do you have any experiences like that with Rick, or has he always been just unicorns and rainbows with you?
I don't know. I can't think any off the top of my head. I will say this. I took this job a little over 6 years ago, and there was a handful of GMs that have been really good to me over the years since I've gotten in this position, and Rick was one of them. And we go way back. I mean, I don't even know if Rick remembers this. I remember this vividly. It was the MAC championship game in 2000, the fall of 2003, and Rick and I were at Bowling Green watching Big Ben Roethlisberger in the MAC championship game, and the snow is coming down sideways, and because the Bowling Green press box couldn't handle the capacity, Rick and I and a couple other scouts were on the roof of the press box with howling winds and snowing sideways, freezing our tails off. And I'll never forget, it was like watching Big Ben, as you can imagine now in hindsight, a guy that's going to be a Hall of Fame NFL player. It looked like the varsity quarterback that night that got pulled down to play on the JV team. I mean, I think he threw, because I left at halftime because I had to drive all the way back to Cleveland in that bad snow. I think he threw 5 touchdowns in the first half. You might want to fact check me there, but it was an unbelievable performance, and I'll never forget that. It was Rick and I'm a scout. Like, Rick's an upper level guy. He might have been the GM of the Dolphins at the time. I can't remember, but I'm like, man, Rick Spielman is out here earning his keep tonight as an executive level guy. I'm out here as an area scout. I've got to be out here. I don't know what Rick Spielman's doing out here.
Well, just so you know, it was, out of all the games I've been to in 30-some years, maybe the coldest game I've ever been to with the snow. And I just remember watching Big Ben in pregame warmups, and he just launching 70-yard balls like it was nothing. And, Jim was a lot smarter than me. He figured, okay, he threw 5 touchdown passes at half. This guy's probably going to be a pretty good player in the NFL. It took me a whole game to figure that out. So I wasn't quite as smart as Jim was. Plus, I didn't have a flight till the morning, so I had nothing to do. I was staying in Bowling Green that night anyway. You know what, Ryan? I could say my famous line. That game was unfalcon believable.
Jim, he used that line with JJ McCarthy when we spoke with him at the Combine about the Bowling Green game in which JJ didn't play that well, but he wanted to get JJ's thoughts on it. So if you know Rick, you know that he's occasionally will misspeak. So I was just happy he didn't drop an F-bomb on television. So that I was happy about that. But what's funny, Jim, you tell that story is that even though Rick comes across as gruff and he doesn't like talking about this part, he is truly one of the best people that I've ever worked with, and it sounds the same. Look, he's blushing, and it sounds like you've had similar experiences.
Move on. It's about Jim. Didn't you hear our producer say this is about Jim today?
All right, yeah. Thank you.
No, Ryan, you bring up a great point, man. Like, I've got a ton of respect for anyone that reaches the chair that Rick reached twice with 2 different teams. I have a ton of respect for that position, and then especially the guys that don't lose touch with their scouting background. I mean, and again, I'm not naming any names, but there have been guys that have got to that GM chair that kind of forget where they came from. I guess is the best way of saying it. And Rick was Rick was never that guy. Every time I saw him on the road, he had his sleeves rolled up. You know, see him at the Senior Bowl with his staff. I mean, he was in it. He was in it with his guys. So I always appreciated that.
Yeah, last year at the Senior Bowl, he was.
Yeah, you can't take the Blusto Scout out of me.
No.
Once a combine scout, always a combine scout.
Oh yeah, Rick has some stories from the combine. He was basically the doorman for getting the players from point A to point B back in the day when it felt like it was just a chaos trying to talk to players. All right, let's go. We have a little bit here we like to do, Jim, to keep Rick engaged. Before we get going, Rick, how many days to the 2025 NFL Draft?
Well, Jim, you know, you probably have, from what we've dug up, 850 players actually on your watch list. So you have 238 days. Well, he actually has less because Senior Bowl comes up way before then. So he's way under the gun right now, more than us.
Yeah.
But just so you know, Jim, there are 238 days left until the 2025 NFL Draft.
Hey, Rick, look at this. Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
There you go.
You have 158 days to figure all this out before the rest of us have to.
There we go.
And I probably have less than 100 days to start picking the roster and inviting these players. So, yeah, thanks for breaking me out in a cold sweat here early in the morning.
Yeah, February 1st, 2025, Senior Bowl Saturday, Mobile, Alabama. Don't miss it. All right, let's get this thing going, Jim.
Yep.
Because you have things to do that don't involve telling stories about Rick. So Rick mentioned that over 850 guys in the initial Senior Bowl watch list that came out last week. I did the math and broke it down. 47 quarterbacks, which is a lot of fun. 157 defensive backs, 122 wide receivers. And before we get going on the players in particular, I wanted to ask you just about the Senior Bowl. And you talked about being there for over 6 years. I think you started working at the Senior Bowl the same time I started covering the draft for CBS. And I remember going to that Senior Bowl. Now, it feels like a lot's changed since then, but Rick reminded me that the Senior Bowl started in 1950, which is amazing. And what's your background? And I'll give a brief synopsis for people who are listening. You mentioned you were a scout. I think you were a scout for 18 years in the NFL. I think you had 4 Super Bowl rings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's pretty good. It gets even better, Rick. He's a Michigan alum, so he has a national title now. So he's got that going for him. A lot of the good things going in the right direction for Jim Nagy. But tell me about your background and how you arrived in Mobile at the Senior Bowl and all the changes you've made, because when you got there, you guys didn't have access to the coaches tape either. I don't think.
No, there's a lot of ground there. I don't want to bore the listeners. Yeah, I did. I scouted for 18 years. Really lucky. My first foot in the door in the NFL was with the Packers in '96, and as Rick knows, that staff was an incredible staff. Ron Wolf, I mean, he had 6 future GMs on that staff. So it was John Dorsey and Scott McLuhan and Ted Thompson and John Dorsey and Reggie McKenzie and just an unbelievable staff. And then when John Schneider got the ability to kind of build his own staff with the Washington Redskins, he and Marty Schottenheimer were, kind of the two guys. I want to say it was 2001. John hired me to scout the West Coast. So, that was kind of my first road job. And then, then had to spend a long time in New England. Went to Kansas City, pre-Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid. We did not get it done in Kansas City, the regime I was with, and we all got shown the door. But happy for all the guys that were left and winning rings now. And then I went to Seattle and had a good 5-year run with John and Pete up in Seattle. And that was great. And then this job came open in the summer of 2018. I've been living in Mobile since 2007. It's my wife's hometown. So really, this was a family decision. My son was in 8th grade. He was getting ready to play high school sports, football, basketball. And I knew as a scout, I was going to miss a lot of that. Maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. And I didn't want to look back, 25 years from now and have any regrets. So I called John and said, Johnny, I think I gotta go for this job. And he loves my wife and he loves my kids. And he's like, yeah, Jim, he's like, you got to do it. You got to go for it. So thankfully they picked me, and it's been a good run. And yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of changes. We've had to adapt. I mean, this whole thing, if you're not willing to adapt, I don't know where we'd be if we didn't make some of the changes that we've made. I mean, like you said, we didn't have tape in the office. That was a big first step. Like, how are we going to evaluate these players and do it the right way if we don't have the tape? We've built an actual football operation. We've got 11 former scouts on this year's staff with over 200 years of experience. So that's been great. It's been created kind of a soft landing spot for a lot of guys that get let go. I mean, you work in football long enough, Rick knows this, you're going to get let go. I mean, it just doesn't. My dad always used to say, he was a high school coach. He used to say, that's why the reason the ball is shaped that way. It's not going to bounce your way every year. So that's been good. It's been a good model for us. We've got experienced guys, trusted guys. And then really the last piece of the process, and I used to do it with Rick's guys. And when we get the board set here in a couple months, it's going to probably be the end of October. Our goal is the end of October, early November every year, to get the board set the way we see fit. But again, the game isn't for us, it's for the NFL. So that's when we start to call around to the NFL teams. And, it would be real easy just to call, have one-off phone calls with buddies around the league. But I wanted to really make that more of a formal process. So we try to hit up half the league every year, 15, 16, 17 teams, and then just go position by position across the board and compare notes and share grades. And, the one thing I've learned in this role is it really is about relationships. And, I think I've been on the same staff as about 13 or 14 of the current GMs right now. So just being on the road with guys like Rick over the years, I mean, there's a mutual respect. They know we're doing this for them, right? Like we're not playing a football. We're playing one football game here and then it's over. I mean, we do this thing for the 32 general managers. So, and then once we compare those notes, if the league sees it a little different, we'll go back and watch the tape, and then it's time to pick a roster. So that's kind of how we've built it.
Yeah, Jim, as you have made great changes down at the Senior Bowl and just behind the scenes, and we're going to get into some player stuff here in a little bit, but just some of the logistics that go on, the interview process, which used to be a total, how can I put it? A shite show, trying to figure out interviews. And, the other thing that I wanted to ask too, if you could hit on, it seems like the NFL is starting to put their hands in it a little bit more, and how the coaching staffs, it used to be, the league would call us, we had 1 year in Minnesota, we were able, before you came down there, we were able to coach a team, but now it's a mixture of a lot of these young and upcoming coaches and some coordinators that get to be head coaching candidates down the road. But can you talk a little bit about that coaching staff, how that's put together, and just some of the other slight changes? People don't realize how important this interview process is in a pre-draft process and how you really clean that up.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of one of those COVID silver linings, Rick, that people like to refer to. We had our game during COVID, as Rick knows. I mean, that was a huge challenge. I mean, we were the only thing that happened in the draft process that year. And again, it's because of the respect factor that I have for guys like Rick and the guys in that GM chair. What a lot of people don't realize is when you're a GM, even some of the other upper level guys, I mean, you're traveling with your team on the weekends. You're not going to a lot of college games. So if we didn't have our game that year, these decision makers wouldn't have seen football players, and again, that's a huge part of it. I think it's a really undervalued part of the evaluation process is the body types and seeing guys in person. I mean, it makes an impact. I mean, to me, so we were kind of hell bent on having the game that COVID year, and we did. Thank God we got through it. We had a great plan. We tested everybody every day. We stripped away all the other events during the week. All we had was practice. We focused on practice and game. And we got through it with only one positive test, which was great. A lot of prayers went behind that year. My wife and I were doing a lot of praying, but one of the things that came out of it, I mean, the interview process, not just at the Senior Bowl, but at all the All-Star games, it was always a free for all, right? So and I became a little more sensitive to it in my role here. You came down the elevator bank in the morning at the player hotel. And when you stepped off, the second floor of that hotel was a mosh pit. It was agents and scouts and financial advisors and media people. And the players couldn't get from the elevator bank to go have breakfast in the morning without somebody like me jumping on their back, like, hey, can I get you for a 10-minute, can you sit down for 10 minutes and talk to me? So that year in COVID, we had to, we bubbled everything. So there wasn't that, right? And the guys could come down the elevator and there was nobody on the second floor and they could go eat. And So that's why we formalized the interview process. So yeah, now every team knows when they're meeting with players. They can request certain players for more interview time. So that's really been cleaned up. Again, I as a former scout, that that falls on them. I mean, the area scouts and the regional scouts and national scouts, they're the ones doing the vast majority of these interviews. And then you'll have the GMs and the head coaches will sit in on some of them. But it always fell on the scouts, and you would spend 80% of your time at All-Star games just sitting around waiting for these guys, waiting for them to come off an elevator, waiting for them to come out of the bathroom. Like it was bad. So no, I do like our new interview format. We've tweaked it every year. Like last year, we added a new wrinkle where we pulled the quarterbacks out. We do them separate. They get, instead of 15 minutes that the normal guys get, they get 40 minutes. And there's whiteboards and there's tape, and we provide all these resources. So we're trying to get better every year. Every year we kind of sit back and talk to guys in the league. How can we streamline our process, make it better for those guys? So yeah. And Rick, to your point, man, when players ask what's the main value of the Senior Bowl, again, I tell them, like, if you're at Bama or Michigan or Oklahoma, like, yes, you've played a lot of football, but you haven't, even in the bigger leagues, even in the Big Ten and in SEC and all those conferences, you're not going against NFL guys every week. I mean, if you're a left tackle in the Big Ten, you might be going against an NFL pass rusher twice in the entire season. But on top of that, what's even more important than that, guys, is I'm not trying to disparage the scouting community, because that was me. That's what I was. I was a scout, and they're very valuable to the process, but it's a lot more. And I would love to get Rick's take. It's got to be more meaningful for a guy like Rick Spielman or Kevin O'Connell, all these head coaches, when they see them themselves, right? Like, instead of a scout coming into the draft room, pounding the table for a guy and talking about what he saw in Tuscaloosa the 3 times he was there at practice, or what they're saying about him in the building, I have to imagine if I'm a decision maker and I sit with these guys and I'm around them for a week and I watch them practice and I watch them respond to a bad rep, getting beaten one-on-ones and how they bounce back, like, that's got to be a lot more meaningful and tangible for these decision makers than if it's some guy like me just telling them about it.
Yeah, I'll just chime in on that. It's amazing that, and these agents have to understand this better, that I didn't get an opportunity to maybe I got to a game, maybe I didn't, like Jim, you were saying, depending on what's going on during the week. But the one thing I would never miss was the Senior Bowl, because it was our first exposure. And for those players to come in and we took our entire coaching staff down there. And now, I know some of it has changed because of technology, but you can't replace what you see with your eyes personally. I can sit there and watch tape all day long and figure out what he is as a player, but I didn't see him at practice. I didn't see how he was interacting with the coaches and with the teammates on the sideline. I remember the best interview that I've ever sat through, and I've sat through 30 years of interviews down there. First 15 years was probably me sitting in one of those lobby lizard chairs trying to get players to go take it to my boss. But Jalen Hurts was the best interview. I had one impression of him going in and a totally different impression of him coming out, where I was just blown away that I knew just by meeting him and sitting down with him in person that this guy, with all the adversity that he had gone through, was going to have success. But there's some other guys, and I'll keep the innocence of those guys, that I had one impression going in, yeah, we got to have this guy. And then all of a sudden I sat there for 15, 20 minutes and I was like, there's no way I want this guy on our roster. But that's what it is. It's to me, the most important part of the pre-draft process. I know we got the combines and the pro days and the private workouts and the top 30 and all the other BS, but it is the last time these players get an opportunity to put a stamp on their career, to be in football pads, and to actually do things that they're going to have to do for you at the NFL level. And the other thing, Jim, I know we'll get into some of these players, but some of these small school guys, that's where they make a lot of money, is when they come in there. And I'll wait as we get down the road on some of these small school guys. But I love to go down there and see any of these, like a MAC guy go against, a Big Ten guy, or a guy that could be a, first, second round pick. those things are invaluable because you don't see them against that level of competition. So to me, out of all the things that we ever did through the pre-draft process, the Senior Bowl, in my opinion, was the number one thing that I wanted to make sure I attended, and that it was a major part of our decision process.
Jim, I'll just say this. Rick, as you may recall, was helping the Commanders fund a GM last year during the early parts of the Senior Bowl. So he flew in and hustled to practice. And I think he missed Tuesday practice, Rick, but I've never seen someone more engaged Wednesday, Thursday practice to catch up, because he truly does love watching the players and seeing the players in person and talking to the players. And Rick, I'll ask you, Jim, how impressive was what Quinyon Mitchell did over the first 2 or 3 days of practice, coming from Toledo, not a small school, but certainly not a Power 5 school. And I'd never seen someone in the 6 years I've been watching Senior Bowl practices have as good a one-on-one drills as Quinyon Mitchell did.
Yeah, he did. He had a great week. And to Rick's point, it's amazing after all this time that there's some agents that just don't get it. And don't get the value of it. And again, I've worked really hard at those relationships, and most of those guys are and women are great people. We've got great relationships, but there's still some guys like Quinyon, for instance. The agent that he went with was the only agent telling him that he should play in the Senior Bowl. He had a bunch of other guys telling him not to. And again, he comes and he's going against, the Roman Wilsons and the Ricky Pearsalls, guys that ended up being, high picks. And he's calling them out. He's wanting them, and he's wanting to go in those one-on-one battles. So, he helped himself quite a bit. I think that, like Rick said, it's crazy that like the group of 5 guys are now considered small school players because of the transfer portal. I mean, it used to be FCS and D2, and now, I mean, you can almost lump those group of 5 guys in as small school players. I mean, we've seen it just in the last couple of years. If you go back like 3 years ago in our offensive line group, you would have looked out on the practice field and you would have seen helmets from like Fordham, Southern, North Dakota State, North Dakota, Tennessee, Chattanooga. All those schools were out there. I think we had like more quote unquote small school players than we did, 2 Central Michigans, a Memphis, than we did Power 5. And now 2 or 3 years later, because the portal, it's changed. So yeah, it was cool to see Quinyon come down there, and then on draft day for him to become the top corner taken. Because we could bring juniors last year. These juniors could come. So for a guy like him, to elevate over some corners that chose not to come here, same like Liatu Latu, the pass rusher from UCLA. He was the first defensive player taken overall, and he elevated over some other pass rushers that chose not to come here. So hopefully some agents saw that. Again, Rick, I think the other point to me that's really meaningful with these guys is don't be short-sighted on just the draft this year. I mean, if you're coming to the Senior Bowl, you're making a statement that you love to compete. Like Taliese Fuaga last year, the tackle from Oregon State, he told me at practice the first day, he's like, Jim, you know how many people are telling me not to come to this? And I'm like, probably a lot. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are telling you not to. But like to me, I've had a lot of these conversations with the GMs. Like, if you're not afraid to compete coming out of college and you're putting yourself out there, you're going to compete, take every opportunity. You love football. It's going to make the GMs feel a lot better about giving you a massive second contract for, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, because that's what you were. Like, you've already made that statement. We knew, you could have taken the easy path coming out in the draft process and taken your foot off the gas and kind of rode it through the process, but you didn't. So I think that's, to me, that's part of it too. I think these players make a statement from the time they're done with their college career through the draft process. And I'm not knocking guys that choose not to. I mean, we had Devin Witherspoon committed a few years ago, and when his agent called and said, Jim, I'm not comfortable sending him, I said, you know what, dude, he's going to be a top 5 pick. I get it. I totally get it. He doesn't have a lot of room to move up. But these guys that are like mid first round picks or picks in the late part of the first round, I do think they can help themselves.
Rick, we got to take a break, but I want to get your thoughts on what Jim just said, because I saw you smirking.
Yes.
Why do you got to give your little spiel here?
Because I always wanted to, I go down there, what do I say? I want to see guys, if you roll the ball out on the playground, who's going to play? And I just can't stand guys that shut it down. And I know we got to take a break, Jim, but when we come back, what I want to ask you is, how hard is it and frustrating, because it was frustrating for me. These guys come down there and it's great. We get to see them in practice, but you have a massive, massive juggling situation for the game. And when we come back from break, let's talk about that.
Saturday is big time on CBS. Number 2 Ohio State welcomes Akron into the Horseshoe. Then more college football in prime time with UCLA taking on Hawaii. Saturday on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
All right, we're back. Rick coming from a job. I love it. All right, Rick, continue with your question because it's a good one.
So yeah, Jim, it's like I said, these agents, and I don't understand what they don't understand about the process. And it just drives me nutty because they want to control everything. But in your situation, you and your staff, I mean, bust your rear ends the whole year to put this great roster together down there. And then all of a sudden it comes on game day and you have guys leaving after 2 days of practice or guys not participating in the game. How hard is that? Or is there any way that there's potential not having that happen?
Yeah, it's been an issue, Rick, for sure. Yeah, I mean, our scouts put in a lot of work, and we always feel good about what we start the week with. And I do feel like it's a little bit of an agenda, like come down here, and because of social media, and again, I'm not going to name names, but there's been a couple guys over the last couple of years that blow up the first day of practice, right? They're all over Twitter, whether it's, a one-on-one rep in O-line, D-line, or, it's a wide receiver cooking a DB, whatever it might be. And then they become kind of social media sensations. And then inevitably I get a phone call or the player comes to me like, hey, I tweaked my ankle. I gotta get out of here type of thing. And and we knew it was a problem. Like it was happening at the Senior Bowl for a while. Again, especially for some of these guys that feel like they're going to be, top 50 to 75 draft picks. But then I knew it was an issue when it started to hit some of the other All-Star games. It was never a thing. Like I remember talking to Dane Vandernat, who ran the NFLPA game a couple years ago before they, stopped playing that game. And he said, Jim, we've never had a player pull out. And then the very next year, they hit like double digits. They had, and these are, again, no knock. I mean, but those guys were a lot of guys that were like free agent level, late round draft picks that you would think would be like scratching and clawing for every opportunity to prove themselves. But I think what it goes back to, Rick, in which I always try to, tell, especially these young agents, I think the worst narrative out there is that the Senior Bowl game doesn't matter because the NFL gets up. We have interviews Thursday night. Most of the guys leave on Friday, right? We do have about 18 to 20 teams that stick around for the game and they'll watch the game. But, en masse, I mean, we lose about 900 NFL folks on Friday, but then they go home and they wear the crap out of that tape, right? Like, I mean, what people don't understand, like when you're with a scouting group, like a Ron Wolftree scouting group, which I was in Seattle, we watch tape of every player. Not every team does it that way, but a lot of teams do. When I was with the Patriots, we didn't. We read our reports, we talked through the players, and that was it. But if you're a team that watches tape in meetings and they played in the Senior Bowl, that's the first tape that's watched on every guy that plays in the game. So like it is important, especially for the positions that like we don't tackle to the ground. That's another perception. Like we don't do a ton of like real heavy banging. So like the running backs, the linebackers, the safeties, those are critical. The game is critical for some of those players. Like you've seen, I know when I was in Seattle and we drafted Rashad Penny in the first round, he had a monster Senior Bowl game. And it was like, our decision was like Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Rashad Penny, so you're going off the game. So yeah, it is, Rick, like it is an issue. We've had to actually increase our numbers of who we're bringing in on the front end of the week. Because once you get to the middle of the week, it's hard to bring guys in and get them up to speed and have them learn a playbook and play on Saturday. So we have adjusted our numbers on the front end. And I will say, thankfully, last year, the number didn't get worse last year. We stayed the same with the number that we lost on game day. But yeah, it's certainly something that has our attention.
Okay, I could just say the name that just totally, and right, DeJuan Jones had one great day of practice and then shut it down the rest of the week. But then he went in the fourth round, I believe. So, but
Rick, he went in the fourth round. Like he didn't do anything at combine. He did nothing at pro day either. So
not even weigh in.
He didn't even weigh in. Like I was at Mike Tomlin. Alabama's pro day was the very next day, and I saw Mike Tomlin at that pro day, and we were talking about it. And he told me, he's like, the kid didn't even weigh in. So did he mess up the process? I think in hindsight, we have to say yes. He went in the 4th round, and then last year he was all rookie, right? Like he played like a guy that probably should have went in the 1st round. So yeah, again, I can never bring up certain examples like that because I'm doing business with these agents year after year after year, and I never want to out a player and talk bad about a player that came to Mobile. But you look at guys that like have been committed to the roster. We had a number of guys last year that were committed to play that kind of pulled out in January, and a lot of them ended up going in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds. And again, maybe I'm too much a believer in this platform, but I don't think some of these guys. We had a corner that didn't commit to play in the game, and I talked to the agent about it. He said he was going to be a 1st-round pick. I said, I don't even think he's going to be a day 2 pick, if you want my honest assessment of it. He ended up going in the late 4th, almost in the 5th round. And had he come, because I knew he wasn't going to run fast. I knew he wasn't going to run fast, but he was a good football player. I said, bring him down here and let him cover people for a week. And then you figure out the combine 40 thing another time. But again, I never will name a player with that stuff, but man, it gets frustrating with some of these agents that I wish they would just look at the track record of what happens with players that do come here and elevate, and guys that don't and end up, not going as high as they should go.
Jim, you should think about hiring Rick to be the guy that tells the agents who the player is, because clearly he has no qualms about doing so. But it's funny. Rick and I were at the Ohio State Pro Day, and he was not happy about DeJuan Jones walking around in sweats, as a lot of people weren't there. And Rick's follow-up will also be Paris Johnson worked out. Paris Johnson busted his ass in that workout. And Paris Johnson was a top, I think he went 6 overall. He was a top 10 pick.
8.
And 8?
Yeah, I think that's when Arizona moved down and moved back up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you're right. And, that's the point that Rick comes back to, and a point that I would imagine a lot of people around the league would also come back to, because DeJuan Jones looks like he should be something more than a 4th-round pick. All right, let's talk about something a little more positive. And you put this out on social media when the watch list came out, Jim, and I thought it was great because, 850-something players. If your name wasn't on that list, that doesn't mean your football journey is over. In fact, you made the point that you have an entire fall to get your name wherever you want your name to be. And you said 7 players who weren't on the 2023 watch list got Senior Bowl invites. And 2 of the names you mentioned, Marshawn Lloyd and Elijah Jones. Marshawn was a running back out of USC. He went in the 3rd round to Green Bay. 2 picks later, Elijah Jones, a corner out of BC, went to the Cardinals. So I think your overarching point is that this isn't the end. This is the beginning of whatever story you want to tell.
Yeah, I'm stealing that line a little bit from John Schneider. Like, he would tell all the guys when we got him up there for rookie minicamp, you get the draft class together, 1st-round pick all the way to the rookie tryout guys. And the guys like, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And I like to get that message out to the players, because we're going to make mistakes. I mean, obviously 7 guys slipped through the cracks last year for us in the watch list process. And all those guys got drafted. Like, we had some guys go undrafted out of our game last year, but those 7 guys all got picked. So I just want the players to know we're going to be exhaustive in this thing. We're going to continue to work. It's not over, because really this year's tape is the most important tape. Like, if you had a really good 2023 and for some reason there's a dip this year, we'll call the coaches. We'll try to figure it out. We'll call scouts, see what they're saying in the building about you. Maybe it's an injury thing. We'll try to figure that out. But I don't want guys to think that because they didn't make a preseason watch list that they're out of it. So that was the point behind that post.
Hey, Jim, just I don't know, as you've been doing this and you've interacted with these kids, and is there a common theme on you after you have interacted with these kids, even through the process and inviting them, probably meeting their support staff around them or whatever their staff is, and then you interact with them during the week of the Senior Bowl? Is there 1 or 2 characteristics that say this guy is definitely going to be a really good player in the NFL? Just if you didn't take anything on the field, just what was the common traits that these kids that you've seen had success in the NFL have?
Yeah, that's a great question. Rick, we try to, there's obviously a lot of touch points from the time we send out the invite in November and they accept, and then there's a lot of onboarding, right? Like, we got to get them on this Teamworks app that we communicate with. We have paperwork they need to do. So you can see right away, kind of which guys are mature enough to handle that business and which guys, you need to keep following up with, or keep, bring in the agent, like, hey, can you help us out here? Like, he's not responding to emails. So I think the maturity piece of it is one. And I'll go back to like when Terry McLaurin played in the game, when he left Mobile that year. Yes, he had an unbelievable week on the field as well. I mean, I think for a big school player, like we talked about how small school players can really help themselves. I always say, like, there's no limit to how many rounds a small school guy can help themselves. I think Quinn Miners was a great example of that a couple of years ago. I mean, shoot, when we did the calls with the NFL teams that year, everyone had a free agent grade on Quinn. Maybe a couple teams had 7th round grades, and he comes down here and ends up in the 3rd round. But for the big school guys, the big program guys, to me, like, if you can elevate 2 full rounds as a Power 5 player, Power 4 player now, that's massive. And when we made those calls for Terry, everyone had him in the 5th and the 6th round. He was the number 2 receiver at Ohio State behind Paris Campbell. We really invited him based off his special teams tape. He was a hell of a gunner. You could see the speed on the punt tape, the punt cover stuff. And then like last year with Braden Fisk. Last year at this time, Braden Fisk going into the week, he was a 4th or 5th round pick, and he went 39. So, so Terry blew me away with his maturity. He was a total grown man. I said it when he left that week that I could see that guy running a Fortune 500 company someday. That's what I thought of Terry McLaurin, the person. So I think the maturity piece, and then you can see, to me, it's almost like a confidence piece, Rick. You can see it, and Ryan, you can see it in their eyes. Like when Deebo Samuel came down here, he was all business. Like, I don't think Deebo smiled all week, and that's not really his personality, but like you can see it when they get off the bus. I've probably done a better job of this over the last few years than early on. With some of the small school guys, I've really had to follow up with schools to make sure that these guys are wired right. The smaller school guys are wired right to come down here and not be overwhelmed by the stage and the Alabama helmets and the Florida State helmets. And so I would say the confidence piece, and then the maturity piece.
Hey, Jim, let me ask you this, and Rick, I'd be curious what you think as well. In the 6 years I've been covering the draft and talking to the players, we had an opportunity to talk to them at the combine for a little bit. It feels like the players are becoming more and more mature. And I don't know if that's training, pre-draft process, if that's social media, if that's something else, or are the kids always the same over the last 20, 30 years?
Well, I'll take it quickly. I think they have matured because I think they have to manage a lot more. I think that's a kind of a hidden benefit of NIL from a team's perspective, is that was always one of the questions that you would have, right? Like, what's this guy going to be with a lot more time on his hands and a lot more money in his pocket? And that was really hard for teams to answer. Like, how do you answer that if you don't know that? Now they can. Now these guys do have a lot of money. These quarterbacks are making 7 figures at these big schools, and they're driving around in 6-figure automobiles. So, and they're having to do appearances and those sorts. So I think that I think these guys are a little more worldly, a little more mature with it. I would love to hear Rick's take, but I do feel like over the last 3, 4, 5 years, we're getting probably a more polished guy.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Jim, on that. Is that, like, I spent a lot of time with Bryce Young at Alabama, and maybe one of the most mature kids I've ever was around. And I always tell the story that I went down there working with Coach Saban and being an NFL consultant for him. And Bryce, I knew was going to be a top 5 pick for sure. Maybe, end up being the number 1 pick overall. And he still, they put a sign out that, hey, Rick will be in the building if you want to talk your draft status. This was after the season. And I'm expecting the guys in the mid to later rounds to come through. And first player that walked through that door was Bryce. I says, Bryce, I appreciate you coming, but I don't know what you want me to tell you. He goes, well, I saw your name. They asked me that it's my responsibility to come if they have someone come in their building and talk. And just all the stuff that these kids have to deal with, the Dr. Pepper commercials and all the NIL stuff and this and that. They seem to be a little bit more business savvy. I think, the agents now, and I don't know how this works, to be honest with you, but they can't represent him as a NFL player, but they can represent him in marketing deals and things like that. So I think the kids are getting exposed a lot earlier to what they're going to have to deal with once they get into the NFL. And they're dealing with it almost at the high school level right now, if I'm not mistaken. Jim, I want to follow up on this NIL stuff, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. But is it ever going to be a point where, working with all the colleges I currently work with, it's like first thing out of these kids' mouth is how much. But, it's not like I want to go play for the Crimson Tide, or I want to go play for the Buckeyes, or I can refer to that team up north since I'm from Ohio. I can't say. But is that becoming an issue, or do you ever foresee that coming where these players are going to have to get paid, or do you think there's still plenty of talent out there that want to come down and prove themselves?
Yeah, Rick, I spared you the winged helmet today. I left that out of respect for your Ohio bloodlines. I get asked that a lot, Rick, and I tell people all the time, if we're in the business of paying players to play in all-star games, we're out. There's just, again, we're not to dive into our financials much, but we don't have the wherewithal to pay players. But I do think the agent community and the players both understand that you can make a lot of money at the Senior Bowl. The payoff's in April, though. You have to come down here and perform, but you can make a lot of money. And there's every year we can cite example after example of guys that have made a lot of money down here. We've already referenced a handful of them here on the show. But if we're talking about upfront money, and then the other part of that is, Rick, like, what moves the needle, right? Like if you're a quarterback and you're sitting in Columbia, South Carolina, and they're paying you $4 million to play quarterback, and you're driving a G-Wagon, what possibly can we pay you here in Mobile to get you to come play in the, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know. If it ever got to that point, then the NFL teams would have to start, chipping in or something, because we're certainly not in the place. And I don't want to speak for other All-Star games. I can't imagine any other All-Star game would be in a position to do that either.
No,
that was my question too.
Yeah. To me, the point is, if you're coming down there to help improve your draft stock, which that's what the game is for, to improve the financial on the back end, sometimes these kids look so narrow visioned instead of just looking at the overall. Like, for example, Caleb Williams got $38 million this year. I think the top pick in the second round got $6 million. So you imagine just moving up 10 spots in the draft by how you perform at the Senior Bowl, the significant financial gain that you just got, instead of making $5,000 to go play at a Senior Bowl. To me, that's BS, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I'll get really mad.
Well, Rick, I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's honestly, like, that's a conversation I've had for 6 years now with friends in the agent community. Is I feel like this game matters more for the guys up high in the draft. It can be more meaningful. I think there was a conventional, approach to it that, like, if I'm going to be a first round pick, why would I go down there and do that? But to me, if you move from 25 to 22, or 25 to 18, or 18 to 18 to 14, every single one of those draft slots up there is worth millions of dollars. So my gosh, Terry McLaurin made a lot of money moving from the 5th or 6th round to the 3rd round, but Kadarius Toney made more money moving from, teams had Kadarius in like that 40 to 50 range before the Senior Bowl, and he went 20. He moved 20, 25 spots up at that point. He made a ton of money. So yeah.
The other point too is that every dollar is pretty much guaranteed in the first round now, from 1 to 32. But there's no guarantee starting the first pick in the second round. So just moving up 2 spots, you just got pretty much a 4-year fully guaranteed option with a 5th year, or with an option on it. But all of a sudden, that's a huge swing in the financial by moving up 2 spots, by going down there and doing things the right way at the Senior Bowl.
I think Xavier Leggett's a great example of that. So the receiver from South Carolina this year, Leggett had a monster year last year, kind of a breakout year. We were sitting here a year ago, going into last year's season, he had 167 yards receiving his junior year. He comes out week 1 against North Carolina, has 178 yards, and then ends up being a first-round pick. So, that's an unbelievable story. But the Panthers, Dan Morgan traded back into the first round to get Xavier Leggett. If they don't do that, Leggett's probably a 2. And then, like what you said, now none of the money's guaranteed, and he doesn't have that guaranteed 5th year. So yeah, it's really meaningful.
I don't want to talk about Spencer Rattler. I was a huge Spencer Rattler fan. I was glad he went to the Senior Bowl. Jim would give me a hard time about him. I would imagine now, Jim, that maybe he goes higher than the 5th round. But I thought he's a tough guy. But Xavier Leggett absolutely had a fantastic made himself a lot of money, to your point. Hey, Rick, I want to ask you quickly. Jim mentioned these high-paid college players driving around in fancy cars now. What car did you drive around in Southern Illinois?
A 1981. What was it? Satellite.
Is that a car? What is that?
I think it was. Yeah, it was a metal car. The thing
a metal
was like,
car.
Yeah.
What'd you have? What'd you have in Ann Arbor, Jim?
I had a 1990 Chevy S10 pickup.
Oh, okay, that's hardcore.
Yeah, well, it's that, those people are a little upper echelon. I was at Southern Illinois, so
What's sad, Rick? I'm a little bit younger than you. I had a 1980 Honda Civic hatchback in college. So your car was newer than my car. All right, let's get Jim out of here. But before we do, Jim, we got to get you 3 guys of the 850 plus players that are currently on the watch list that you're pretty excited to see how they make things happen for them this fall. First up, the guy we talked about last year when he was at Duke, because we thought he might have an opportunity to come out. He got hurt. Now he's transferred to Notre Dame. Quarterback Riley Leonard.
Yeah, excited to see Riley. He's a local guy for us. He's from across the bay over in Fairhope, Alabama. So saw this guy play. He was a great hooper, which I don't know if a lot of people know. I mean, he had offers to play Division I basketball. I mean, this dude could do about every single dunk you want him to do. So, really big guy. We're talking 6'4", 220, whatever Riley's at now. Really athletic, has made some flash throws over the years. I'm just excited to see him in that Notre Dame offense, with Mike Denbrock and with some really good pieces around him. Excited to see where Riley goes. And you can say that by a lot of these quarterbacks. Excited to see Cam Ward at Miami. Excited to see Jalen Milroe with Kalen DeBoer's staff. So I think there's a lot to be determined in this year's quarterback class, but certainly excited to see Riley up in South Bend.
Rick, you include Riley in the list of guys who can make that rush up to the top?
Question on him, there's no question about the athletic skill set. It's the processing and the throwing. But a guy like that can make a tremendous leap by going down there, having a good year at Notre Dame, and like Jim referred to in that offense. But I haven't seen him throw live yet. A lot of GMs haven't seen him throw live yet. But just spending that time with him, and again, a lot of it is done on the back end. It's not in front of the cameras in this interview process. And Jim, that's great. You carved some of these quarterbacks out because you may not have that time with them again. In fact, we used to, if they checked all the boxes at the Senior Bowl interview, Harrison Smith, we coached him in the Senior Bowl. I didn't talk to him until we drafted him. That's the last time you ever heard from Minnesota Vikings again. So a lot of times teams will get all their work done. And if that kid's clean across the board, I mean, you'll see him at the combine, workout, pro day. But if we felt very strongly about the kid's maturity and passion for the game and checked all the boxes and interviewed outstanding down there, we didn't talk to him again until we called him on draft day.
Harrison was a great interview. I interviewed him too for I think it was with the Chiefs at the time. But yeah, he was one of those. He's one of those interviews you remember. I remember talking to Harrison Smith and how good he was.
So Notre Dame faces Texas A&M this Saturday. So that's going to be exciting. And I'll go to a new Texas A&M player, edge rusher, Nick Scorton, who came by way of Purdue. Rick and I watched him during summer scouting, and this dude has some juice.
He does. And again, I was going to try to hold on to this player comp, and I hate doing the player comp thing, and I rail on that.
I have to do it. I hate doing it, but it can't get any worse because my co-partner here is the worst player comp I've ever been associated with for the last 2 years. But
he doesn't love him, Jim. He doesn't love him.
Can't get any worse.
No, again, you get guys like us going, Rick, and we hate them because and I understand the media part because I did the ESPN thing for 3 years, and a lot of those companies they require their guys to come up with player comps. But in the NFL, I mean, if you're an area guy and you write 400 players, you might only player comp 25 guys. I mean, because to me, what you're trying to do with a player comp, everything has to line up for the GM. I mean, if Rick hasn't seen him and all he's doing is listening to my report in meetings, I'm trying to paint an accurate picture.
Right.
And that's why every single little thing has to line up, from body type to athleticism to play style, whatever it might be. So this is lofty, but like when I watched Nick Scourton this summer, I look at the measurables and he's, 6'5", he's 280 pounds and he's coming off the edge and he's got he's really fluid mover and he's got a crazy, spin move. And I'm thinking, how many 280 pound guys have I seen do this? I mean, there's a huge difference between watching a 250 pound guy come off the edge and a 280 pound guy come off the edge. And I went all the way back to Mario Williams, guys. And I know he was the number one he was the number one overall pick in the draft. So I'm not trying to put that on Nick. That's that's why I hate staying away from. I stay away from those things too, because I don't want to put that on a player. But Mario jumped off the tape at NC State because he was this big guy that had ridiculous movement. I remember standing behind him at practice during two-a-days that year, and he was 280 at the time, and he had this massive neck. And I'm like, when this guy grows into his neck, he's going to be 295, 300 pounds. So that's who he, just in terms of size and blend of athleticism, I mean, I'm excited to see what this guy could be. I think he's just scratching the surface.
But Ryan, you want me to throw a comp out? And I'll go old school Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
Robert Porcher.
Oh,
wow.
Carolina State, when we drafted him when my combine days, scouting for the combine up with the Detroit Lions. End up still, I think, is the all-time leading sacker in Detroit Lions history. That was my second or third year scouting, and I remember going to see this big dude at South Carolina State, and the Southeast was my area, and I was like, this guy had 250 sacks his senior year. I was like, no one from South Carolina State can play in the NFL. I mean, maybe a 7th-round free agent. And so we had the Blesto meetings, and you share all the information in December with the teams. And all of a sudden he goes there and lights it up in the Senior Bowl. I said at the December meetings, yeah, he's probably a late-round pick just because of his size. He goes and lights it up at the Senior Bowl, lights up the whole pre-draft process. We drafted him in the first round, and then my boss got called by other teams. You're stashing players because you're blessed. Game of 7th round.
You're Blesto guys sandbagging. I love it.
But Jim, Rick, the story is actually you liked him a lot more, but you were a little nervous because he's a small school guy, right?
I didn't like him his junior year. Senior, he did, but I was young scout there, and I was afraid to put my what's the best way? Reputation on the line after 2 years of scouting to say that, hey, yeah, this defensive end from South Carolina State, I would take him in the first round. I don't want to lose my job after only being in the league for 2 years as a scout.
Yeah. No, that's a great one, man. I was a huge Lions fan growing up. Rick, watching your brother, those Lions teams. I was diehard Lions fan. So yeah, Robert Porcher, that's a great one. He was a great player.
You can use that if you see it. If there's any pro comp in his ability.
Absolutely.
Hey Jim, can you separate being I don't know if you grew up a Michigan fan or not, but can you separate being a Michigan fan with Chris Spielman playing for your favorite team?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Okay. I mean, I was more diehard Lions than I was Michigan at that time. Growing up as a kid, I mean, those Lions teams, they were my team. That's why it was so cool. I mean, my parents are in their late 70s now, and I called Brad Holmes at the end of last year. Towards the end of the year, and I said, my parents up in the same hometown that I grew up in, I'm like, they stayed up and watched your entire Monday Night Football game, man. I'm like, you're doing something right. So it's cool. It's cool to see what Dan and Brad are doing up there, because that has been a long-suffering fan base. They had some really good years there when Rick's brother was there with Jerry Ball and Benny Blades and some of those dudes on defense, and then obviously Barry and Lomas and Kevin Glover and Herman Moore and those guys. But it'd been a while. So, it's cool. It's cool what Detroit has going right now.
Rick likes to joke that if Brad Holmes isn't careful, he's so successful, he's going to end up on this podcast.
Like me.
Like Rick. All right. Speaking of small school guys, and Rick, Jim's not afraid to put his name on this young man. Going deep, Middlebury, offensive lineman, Thomas Perry. And Rick and I have not watched Thomas Perry because we don't have the available tape, but you'll have to be our eyes and ears because you're excited about this guy.
Yeah, and again, I give all credit here to Duke Manyweather. I don't know if you guys follow Big Duke on social media. He's an offensive line trainer in Dallas, does an unbelievable job. We end up with 10 to 20 of Duke's guys every year in the Senior Bowl, and I feel like they all go in the top 100 picks. He does a great job getting those guys ready for the process. But so I went to he and Creed Humphrey and Lane Johnson, a couple Senior Bowl alums, they put on this event, O-Line Masterminds in the summer. Great event, really cool event. I go there just to learn and, listen and learn and meet people every year. And he brought this Thomas Perry kid over, and he was like, Middlebury, the only player I can ever remember going back in the Rolodex that played at Middlebury, Steven Hauschka, was a kicker we had in Seattle, started his college career at Middlebury, then transferred to NC State. But that's it. I got nothing else from Middlebury. Charlie, our scouting assistant, who Rick worked with, has worked with. Charlie's upstairs. He played at Amherst, so these guys played against each other. But Thomas is a guy that Duke went to Duke's camp over the summer, worked with Duke. He's got all the NFL measurables. He's 6'2", 300 and some pounds, looks the part. He's just a huge, big, muscled up guy. And some of the clips that I posted of Thomas just like sliding and redirecting and getting out of his stance and getting out on poles, combined with all the athletic testing stuff. I mean, he meets all the benchmarks for a high draft pick on the offensive line, whether it be, he's like a 9.4 broad jump and a 32 vertical jump. And so he's hitting all those things. So again, I knew nothing about him before this summer. The only tape I've seen has been the limited clips that Duke has sent to me, but I've got enough trust with Duke at this point. Like, he knows what he's looking at. He's the one that was sending me Quinn Miners clips that year when they canceled Division III football because of COVID, and he was training Rashawn Slater and Quinn Miners. That's what he would do. That's why I was bought in on Quinn Miners. He was literally sending me videos from their workouts, and you would see Rashawn Slater, who was the number one offensive lineman on our board that year, take one rep, and then Quinn take the next rep. And I was like, man, the difference there is negligible. In watching this Thomas Perry do some of the stuff that Duke was putting him through, he certainly has the physical tools to play in the National Football League. So he's gonna be a fun one to watch. He'd be a fun one to have down here. I brought up Quinn, and we had a guy, Ben Barch from St. John's in Minnesota a few years ago that was a 4th round pick to Jacksonville. And predating my time, Phil Savage brought the kid from Hobart College down here that played in Tampa Bay all those years. And now I'm having an old guy moment where I'm blanking on his name a little bit, but Ollie Marpet.
Ollie
Marpet, when they brought him down. So there is a history of Division III guys, and it'd be really cool if Thomas Perry's the next one.
Fun fact, Rick, my wife went to Hobart. She did not get drafted by the Buccaneers, though. Anything you want to ask Jim before we get him out of here?
No, Jim, just thanks for coming on today, and very informative. Hopefully people appreciate what the Senior Bowl is meant to be, but more importantly, appreciate everything you do to make the event, in my opinion, the best event through the whole pre-draft process. And hopefully we'll be able to come down there again. We can get some passes again to come down and cover the Senior Bowl, because I cannot stay away from the Senior Bowl no matter what.
Well, guys, thanks for having me on. This was a cool opportunity. Rick, thank you. That means a lot, man. Coming from you, that means a ton. And yeah, we can't wait to get you back down. We got a lot of work to do down here between now and February. But
158 days.
Yeah. Nice. Thanks for the visual reminder of the entire podcast. But no, guys, this was fun. Thanks for doing it.
Awesome. All right. That's a wrap on episode 175. Special thanks to Jim Nagy. And by the way, you can check out the watch list at seniorbowl.com. And I use it to watch games Saturday. You can find out who's who and who's going to be guys to keep an eye on as we get through this draft process. Thanks as always to my guy, Rick. Thanks to Debo for producing. Have a great weekend, everybody.